Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Enterprise Knowledge session. I'm happy to present Sarah Duane and Annabelle Lane from Enterprise Knowledge that will deliver their presentation on graph use cases for data-driven decisions. The floor is yours, Annabelle and Sarah.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your attendance, and we're excited to talk to you a little bit over the course of the next half hour on how we've used graphs and two specific use case solutions in order to best leverage data-driven decisions to implement greater value and ROI for the business in two different industries. So we're looking forward to getting into that with you. And before we do, I just figured we'd do a little introduction so you know a little bit more about who you're hearing from. So Annabelle and myself, we're both from Enterprise Knowledge. So Enterprise Knowledge is we're the world's largest KM data and information management consultancy. So the world of semantics, the world of graph it's really our bread and butter. It's what we love to do. So you see these 10 areas of expertise, listed up on the left there, a lot of which really correspond to a lot of the sessions I'm sure you've been going through over the course of the day, including, knowledge graphs and ontology design, taxonomy design, all of that fun stuff is really what we do. And we've done dozens and dozens of projects on this, so we're excited to share a little bit with you today. So myself, my name is Sarah Duane. I'm a consultant and a project lead for a lot of our graph implementation projects. So I've done graph implementation for use cases including semantic search, recommendation engines, chatbots for organizations in the federal space, in the healthcare space, in the construction space, and more. And it's something I really enjoy, so I'm looking forward to talking with you about that today. And I'm just going to ask my colleague Annabelle to introduce herself as well before we get into it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Annabelle Lane. I'm a technical analyst at Enterprise Knowledge. So I support a lot of our knowledge graph efforts from use case refinement and early ontology design through to implementation. A lot of my work focuses on coordinating focus group facilitation, content analysis, and conducting data mapping for ontology and knowledge graph development.
Awesome. Thanks, Annabelle. All right, so let's get into it. What are we going to talk about today? So we'd like to take you through three main things over the course of our presentation. The first we'll start with is, why graph, the value of graph, and why graph use cases are so important to starting and building the framework for a larger scale graph implementation. The second we'll go into is two specific use cases in which we built out a graph for a specific organization. So we'll go into depth on that solution for you and talk about how that allowed us to really improve business value at the organization. And then we'll end out with formalizing the approach. So we have a pretty ironed out approach for doing graph implementation, and we will kind of summarize that for you all and talk about how that what each of those steps looks like. And really kind of what I would love for you all to be thinking about as we go through, the course of the presentation is really this key takeaway at the bottom of the screen here. So graphs, as we all know, really allow us to really automatically bring in information and context and relationships from potentially siloed sources to give us decisions and recommendations and answers with that added context from their domain in order to make our accurate decisions for the business case or the use case that the organization has. So we'll be talking about that as we go throughout, but that's really what I wanted to hone in on. So with that being said, we'll kind of start with, a lot of the problems that you see listed on the screen here, the challenges that we're facing in the information management industry. They really, are all aligned and all come back to the wide range of unstructured information, the wide expansive siloed information, and really, the interest for AI that's really blown up, obviously, over the last year and more or so. And I've worked with countless organizations, over the last few years that have these problems, and I'm sure a lot of them are sounding familiar to you all. In one instance, I worked with a major pharmaceutical company where we designed a semantic search solution for them. And you can imagine they had data and information in a wide range of locations, including clinical trial notes, drug information, et cetera, really located in these different locations, in these different formats, Excel, and so this had databases, even some hand written things for clinical trials. And so there's really the importance of how do we take advantage of all of this extensive information that this organization has to bear. And one of the ways, of course, to do that, as we know and are graph fans, is through a graph. And I'll talk a little bit too as to why graph is important in terms of the capabilities that it offers, but I won't focus on this in too much depth. So we know this, and this is something I'm sure you're hearing a lot today too. But graphs allow for that strong understanding of context and relationships. So how your content fits together amongst those various siloed sources becomes a little bit more clear. And they also allow us to store information in a way that we may speak or may write in terms of human language. So that makes it not only human understandable but also machine understandable in that same way. They can, understand and integrate both structured and unstructured content and information. And as we talked about on the previous slide, so much of the information and knowledge that we have, in this world is unstructured at this point. So that's a really important feature here. And of course, aggregating information from those disparate sources really gives you that 360 degree view of what your data and your information can offer. And so what I'd like to emphasize on this too is not only what graph can bring in terms of its capabilities, but as we go through the rest of our presentation, we're going to be talking about two specific projects and two specific use cases that we worked on. So why is it important to have a defined, concrete, specific use case that can create that framework for you as you scale and productionalize graph at your organization? So use cases, of course, provide that foundation. It allows you to show the organization what kind of value you'll be, bringing to the organization using graph, and gives you that framework, that understanding for your teams to be able to take what you learned in the pilot or that's initial use case and expand it forward. So it's really important to have a strong starting use case. So I mentioned at the beginning, as in our introduction for enterprise knowledge, we've worked with Graph plenty of times and work with GraphDB quite a lot as well. And we've done this type of project many times in a lot of these use cases that you see on the screen here. Actually, all of the use cases that you see on the screen here. But for the sake of time we have on this presentation, we're just going to dive into a few. So we're going to dive into one that's more geared towards risk prediction and mitigation, and one that's geared towards content personalization. So with that being said, we'll focus on these two use cases on the screen here. We'll start off with risk mitigation. So this was a project we did with a federal organization that helped to identify potential risks in project to reduce that manual planning time. And then we'll focus on the second one, which was a content personalization use case. So we helped a healthcare training organization automatically recommend training content for users based on their specific profiles and needs. So as we go through these use cases, think about the use case, the persona needs that we're talking about, and how that can allow us to make those data-driven decisions and build out the use case. So with that, Annabelle is going to walk us through the first one.
Yep. So our first case study is centered around risk mitigation. This specifically was for a project that we worked on with a government agency focused on workplace health and safety for construction sites. So they were seeking a recommendation engine based on a graph for internal use to more easily surface and leverage their vast amount of data and information on construction site risks and workplace regulations. The main driving factors for developing the graph and the recommendation engine from an organizational standpoint were they wanted to optimize construction site design and better inform planning decisions in terms of developing the construction sites by being able to better identify risks and regulations earlier on in the process. They had a lot of data and information on this, but it was located in thousands of documents, especially unstructured, located in siloed sources across the organization. So it took a lot of manual effort and a lot of time and a lot of reliance on finding particular SMEs or other people who worked on past projects and things to really be able to surface this information and make those decisions in terms of the site planning. So with the recommendation engine, they sought to identify these earlier on in the process by surfacing this information more automatically and in a centralized location, which also would, in a parallel manner, sort of deepen internal knowledge and expertise to reduce over-reliance on individual people as well throughout the organization. So when we wanted to address these business needs, once we sort of figured out what it was they were looking for, we really wanted to scope the initial development to show the immediate impact of graph, specifically in terms of how graph could facilitate these data-driven decision-making for the individual users. And so to do that, we specifically focused on the persona of a construction site project planner. So this is someone who has an understanding of the project scope and the location and the materials being used, but they may not have the expertise of the people actually working on the site or people who tend to assess risks following these projects. So they would have to sift through these thousands of documents in siloed locations, unstructured assessments. Some were handwritten, some were scanned PDFs, some were in structured tabular format, but it was all very difficult to sift through. This really prevented them from being able to quickly and easily find information to make these decisions in terms of what things they needed to consider when planning for their construction site blueprints, and was difficult to have a full awareness of the potential risks and the legal obligations and regulations that they needed to adhere to as well. So if we go into the next slide, we're going to go into how the graph-powered engine that we ultimately developed would save time for these decisions that they were making. So on the left here is a snippet of the ontology model that we developed. These took the construction site planner's inputs of the location, the material, and the scope. And then the graph would be able to automatically connect this information and link it together as a specific scenario and group potential risks that would result from the combination of these different inputs, and be able to generate that and showcase that to the end users. So ultimately, the graph that this ontology powered for the recommendation engine would facilitate data-driven decision-making by automatically providing that additional contextual information of the related historical data, past instances that occurred, along with different risks and regulations and legal considerations as well, that they wouldn't necessarily find in the unstructured reports. The reports that they had relied on before were all in different formats and had different people writing them and authoring them. So they didn't all contain the same consistent information all the time. And so with the graph and with this recommendation engine, they were able to extract information all in one place in a more consistent format to be able to have that context to inform their site planning decisions. The graph was also able to prioritize the results for the user by leveraging additional information that we had on historical data of the average severity of past incidents, which risks tended to be result in more extreme accidents than others, as well as which ones tended to be more frequent than others. So in this way, the site planners didn't have to, sift through all of the different reports and documents and sort of make that decision on their own. They were able to automatically see which things they should be able to prioritize and would be more significant to their decision making with the results that the recommendation engine was providing. And then, as mentioned, being able to automatically associate related and applicable concepts such as different regulations and legal considerations would ensure that they would consistently adhere to these things in their design decisions. So altogether, putting this all together with the recommendation engine, the graph powered engine was able to save a lot of manual time spent by employees searching for information in a large amount of unstructured documents, those thousands of documents that were siloed in a bunch of locations, and was able to automatically surface all of this info together in a central location with additional context to really facilitate that data-driven decision-making with all that additional information that before they either would have to spend a lot of time finding or would be unable to find. And so with that, I will pass it on to Sarah to cover our next use case.
Awesome. Thanks, Annabelle. So the second case study that we want to go into depth on is a project that we did with a healthcare workforce provider. So this is, an organization who provided trainings and content for medical professionals, so nurses, doctors, et cetera, to allow them to not only build up and upskill in training, but also make sure that they're meeting the competency needs and requirements to meet compliance regulations in that space. And so this organization, came to us and in this, conversation of, what challenges are you facing and how does that lead us to this case study, this project that we're going to describe, is, we discovered, they had really a lot of siloed content and a large volume of it. And it wasn't being recommended and it wasn't being used to its full potential for all of the great content that they had. Our first, scope of this, or first use case for this project with this organization, I think there were over 6,000 documents or so that we were leveraging in order to, power and instantiate the graph. And so their learning content, it was also hard to maintain and hard for content SMEs to manage. Because it was, quite difficult and time consuming for them to have to bundle together recommendations and content modules, if you will, to provide, healthcare workers. And so what we wanted to do was provide personalized content offerings based on recommendations of what content and trainings medical professionals should take in order to increase the interaction with their content and be able to recommend it to people at the time that they needed it. And so what we did was we built a recommendation engine based on a knowledge graph to deliver relevant course recommendations based upon test questions that medical professionals got wrong on a compliance exam. And we actually took this graph and expanded it and scaled it a couple steps further to also bring in compliance information as well as recommending content based on medical competencies, so the skills and the knowledge that different roles need to in order to be a successful nurse or doctor or whatever the case may be. So this recommendation engine, it's beating accuracy benchmarks that the organization had previously. It's replacing manual processes. It's supporting really that higher quality, more advanced and more targeted recommendations that give clear reasons why a piece of content was recommended, based on how the content is connected to the large taxonomy and the ontology model that's powering that graph. And so, as I kind of described the case study there, something we often think about in these projects is how do we make sure that we're scoping those needs of the persona, the healthcare worker in this case, and those needs in order to build a graph that has value and ROI and allows the users to make those data-driven decisions that support stronger business value. And so the value add for this case study here was really, it was both time and money savings. So the training, that these healthcare workers were needing to do, it was more efficient because they knew what to take. It was less burdensome. So they, had time free to take care of patients. But also it removes a lot of time and burden on content SMEs to create those bundles of courses that were needed to meet those compliance requirements. So the decisions for what those bundles, what those recommendations should be are really driven from the data and the recommendations that are given by the graph. And I'll go a little bit more into depth just to show you a little snippet of the supporting ontology here. This is not the full ontology, but it's part of the ontology for one of those use cases. It's for that test question to course use case. So this was a cloud-based recommendation engine. As I mentioned, it was supported by really that semantic layer that allowed us to unify, relate, and combine information and siloed data that existed on like source questions, courses, related healthcare taxonomy data. So we built out a very comprehensive taxonomy to connect these things, and gives recommendations based on scores or questions that were missed in that test, based on entity matching through the taxonomy we built, and weighting that we built into our recommendation logic. And the key point I'll emphasize here is that not only does Graph allow us to create those automated recommendations that save folks time, but also we're able to know how they were recommended, again, based on those weightings, the traversal in the graph, the connection between the taxonomy nodes. So it's not a black box solution, which is, I think, really important in this new world as AI comes up so frequently. So this case study was successful in giving us the ability to automatically surface that information and give us that added context to make those decisions easier for users. So I'm going to pass to Annabelle, who's going to round us out to talk about how we formalized, the formalized approach that we used for both of these case studies, and then end us with some key takeaways.
Yeah, so overall, to ensure that the graph that you develop truly facilitates data-driven decision-making in your organization, we found that it's really important to follow these key steps, which we've come to recognize based on our past experiences with the case studies that we've mentioned, as well as the dozens of others that we've worked on. So the first is always, of course, defining the use case. You really want to understand what decisions the users are making and how can you best support them in better making that decision. So when you're defining the use case, you want to understand who is interacting with your graph, what information they might be inputting into the graph, if that's applicable, and what do they really need to receive in order to support or inform their decision-making, and ultimately time and reduce manual effort with the decisions that they are making. The next is you want to create the supporting data models. You want to consider how to define and associate the concepts in your domain to really facilitate decision-making. As we've seen, the key value and time saver with Graph is the ability to automatically connect information together and provide that additional context that we've been referring to throughout. So based on your identified domain and your use case, you want to design the taxonomy and ontology models that really meet the needs of the graph and match the language of the end users as well. From there, you can construct the graph and ultimately integrate with additional source systems so that users can access and effectively interact with the graph for their needs, primarily in a central location, rather than having them go to multiple sources to find the information that they need to support their decision making. And then ultimately, once you have that initial graph in place and you've met the needs of your prioritized use case, you can take the time to develop more advanced applications that graphs can power to address more complex use cases and other capabilities, and continue to iterate and scale upon your existing solution for enhanced data-driven decision-making at your organization. So with that, we're going to take it to the last slide and go over our key takeaways. So again, just really wanting to re-emphasize the point that graphs have the ability to surface siloed information really quickly with enhanced context to facilitate that informed decision-making at your organization. So when considering data-driven graph use cases for your own organization, we encourage you to prioritize those that are compatible with graph solutioning, but will also achieve tangible impacts for the business by facilitating that decision-making with enhanced context and connected data. So to wrap up this session, before we turn to questions, we highly encourage you to consider what data-driven use cases graph can support in terms of decision-making at your own organization. And with that, we will pass it to Ivan to facilitate the questions.
Annabelle, Sarah, thank you very much. We have a few questions in the chat. First one coming from, actually two questions from Frederick from FindWise. Were these models deployed? What did the user experience look like?
Yeah, I mean, for the, I specifically worked on the construction site planning one. So we did an initial proof of concept. So we did have a front end interface that users could interact with. They were able to come in and click through from the controlled lists or taxonomies that we had developed with those three key concepts of element, scope, and location. And then, click little button, have all the risks generated with the grouped information as well. With the related legal considerations and regulations that we talked about, the different supporting data on severity levels and frequency based on historical data that we had. And then from there, they were able to click again and change their inputs and scroll through the different results that they had. And then we provided recommendations on how to eventually scale that up into a full MVP in the future.
Thank you. Mindful of time, we have about 2 minutes. I appreciate if you can shorten the answers. Another question by Frederick. What was the CMS used in the construction scenario? How long were the projects?
Yeah, so the projects were, the construction one was about 4 months or so, I think, 4 to 6 months. And then the healthcare training provider one started out as a proof of concept, 4 to 6 months, and then we took it and worked on and scaled this project for 2 years over the course to expand the use cases. The CMS question, so because the construction one was a pilot, or proof of concept, if you will, we were using their kind of data and their spreadsheets, their et cetera, in the locations in which they could give it to us. So we didn't integrate directly with the CMS during the course of that those couple months.
Thank you. A question by Alex Carman from KeyLogic. In either use case, were you able to leverage any pre-existing curated ontologies? And if so, how comprehensive and expressive were they?
That's a great question. So yes, in both cases, we leveraged standards and existing ontologies that exist in the space. So for the construction side of things, I regret that I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but if I think of it in the next couple minutes, I'll put it in the chat. But for the healthcare side of things, we used models such as Mesh and more, really to kind of leverage some of the relationships as well as some of the labels that we would use in both our taxonomy and ontology. So that's always an initial good first step, and one that we will expand on ourselves based on our knowledge of the use cases.
Frederick is interested whether the ontologies were all ontologies or they were combined with SCOS taxonomies.
Yeah, great question. So yes, we combined them with SCOS taxonomy. So the taxonomy that kind of sourced that, I like to call it like the middle section where it connects the inputs to the outputs. Those were modeled in SCOS, and so we through that taxonomy development process allowed us. We had broader, narrower terms that were built into our recommendation logic. So if a broader term is found in the input, it will connect itself through not only ontological relationships, but also, SCOS relationships, broader and narrower. I hope that answers the question.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but a quick answer, please, to Juliana's question. Which one method do you recommend to evaluate the quality of ontologies before using it in the knowledge graph?
Oh, that's a hard one to give a quick answer to. I'd say, oh my goodness, like instantiating, a specific example and walking through it from start to end, and then validating it with business stakeholders is the quick answer. I wish we could go into that in a little more depth.
Thank you very much, Sarah, Annabelle, the audience. Lovely questions. Please feel free to join the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.